Hi guys, welcome back to my page. I hope you guys had a good holiday. Hopefully you guys got to spend time with some family and friends for Christmas this year. So today I'm going to be talking about anxiety. I feel like it's something that has been talked around all year, in the sense that everyone's kind of been talking about how, yeah, it's okay to be anxious and, it's normal to have anxiety because of COVID and, this, that, and the other thing. But no one's actually really talked about what it is and how to get through it, and how to get over it, right? Because I'm a firm believer that you can overcome anxiety. I don't think it's something that you have to deal with for the rest of your life. So, for me, I'm, sitting here laughing at the irony of having to talk about anxiety on the 1 week that for me is personally probably the most anxiety provoking week of the year. But before we get into all that, let's start with the definition, right? Anxiety is distress or uneasiness of the mind caused by fear of danger or misfortune. Sorry, I just went to dictionary.com and that was the definition there. Again, distress or uneasiness of mind caused by fear of danger or misfortune. And I think for me, I wanted to kind of add in there that it's the fear or distress of mind caused by any perceived fear of danger or misfortune, right? Because there's no guarantee of it, right? Like if it's something that we perceive, it's something that can produce anxiety within us, right? This year in particular, 2020, has given everybody reason to have anxiety. Obviously, COVID, everyone's concerned about their health, and obviously it's, really turned our world upside down in regards to finances, in regards to, having to social distance, having to stay isolated and stay at home as much as possible. And, on top of that, it was election year, right? So there was a lot of political things going on. And then you also have your own life on top of that. Relationship issues or job issues or lack thereof because of COVID. And, maybe you became unemployed during this COVID season. And so there's a lot of reasons for people to be anxious. And yes, it is okay to be anxious. And it's not something that is too... Let me see. So anxiety is, like I said, could be that perceived fear of danger or misfortune. And so for me personally, Christmas happens to be what we would call a situational stressor. And a situational stressor is basically a day, a time, an event, anything that triggers a memory, which can then cause anxiety. All right, so for me, Christmas has been something that has caused a lot of anxiety for me in the last few years because some things have happened on or around Christmas Day that now my brain has connected the two of, okay, Christmas equals not so good things. And so obviously I've had fun, obviously I've been, I've had other, good experiences outside of those days, but it is something that causes some anxiety for me. Other examples of situational anxiety could be somebody's anniversary, or the day that somebody passed away, or the day that you broke up with a significant other, or, things like that. It's not something that everybody experiences, and it's not the same for every person, right? Not everybody has a breakup on the same day, and not everybody loses somebody on the same day, right? Or it could even be a national thing like 9/11, right? Like that's definitely something that can cause situational anxiety for people, especially if they've lost someone in 9/11. And so, how do you know you're anxious? There's a lot of different ways to know. As a clinician, one of the first things I would do when I heard that one of my clients had anxiety is kind of go over with them like, hey, how do you know that you're anxious? What are some of your signs that tell you that you're anxious, right? For me, again, I can only speak for me, but my voice gets shaky. I feel like I'm short of breath. I can feel like my hands are getting sweaty and or tingly. Let's see. My mind is either racing with a ton of different thoughts, or my mind just goes blank. Like it kind of short circuits my brain, right? And so for me, when I get to that point, I'm like, okay, let's take a breath, right? Even with the idea of recording this tonight, I started getting really anxious because, I want to talk about it and I know it's important, but I also feel like, I've been dealing with anxiety all week and I really don't want to talk about it. But I also know that it's really important to be vulnerable and to be honest with myself in order to help progress through that emotion, right? If you've been to therapy at all, I'm sure you've heard the phrase lean into the discomfort, right? Trust the process. We don't like those words because that means, you know what, we're gonna sit with the anxiety. We're gonna sit with what's making us anxious so that we can walk through it. I think for me, being able to sit through your anxiety and look at, okay, so why is this making me anxious, right? Why is this holiday or why does this event make me feel anxious? Okay, it's because X, Y, and Z happened on that day. And that brings up memories and feelings that maybe you never dealt with, right? Maybe you never properly grieved, or maybe you never properly processed, whatever it was that happened to you or around you on those days. Or you could just have anxiety kind of all the time, right? And one of the reasons I said earlier that it's the uneasiness of mind caused by the perception of fear, of danger or misfortune is because a lot of people, especially with, different anxiety disorders and things like that, it's not necessarily that, they're afraid that, no, that doesn't make any sense, June. So with perceived anxiety, it's, your brain doesn't know the difference between real danger and perceived danger, right? As long as your brain thinks it's having anxiety, thinks that there's danger, thinks that there's something to be afraid of, it's gonna go into survival mode, whether or not it's a real danger, right? And so, as a therapist, one of the things that I learned very early on was not to discount their anxiety. Why are you so anxious about that? There's no reason to be anxious. Yeah, that doesn't help anybody because they are, right? Like the fact of the matter is that they are anxious about X, Y, and Z. And so you have to start where they're at, right? And so whatever your anxiety is, it's okay. Your anxiety is real and it's okay. But in order to move past it, in order to move on from it and no longer be constantly anxious, you have to sit with it. You have to feel the anxiety. I've been through a lot of different traumas, and so I know what it's like to fear that if I start to feel, if I really go there, I honestly felt like that all of those emotions were going to overwhelm me and be too much for me to handle. And I can tell you, being on the other side of it, that I made it. I will be very honest, it was very difficult and it was very painful, and it was easier on some days than others. But it was something that I really had to work through so that I'm not anxious anymore, right? Like, I don't think I have, I haven't had a panic attack in over a year. I haven't, had like super anxious thoughts in a while. In the last week, it's been tough. I've had, some flashbacks and nightmares, inability to sleep, things like that. But again, very situational. I've known that this is something that I would have to deal with this week coming up. But for me, it's always something that is able to kind of subside once the holiday season is over. So for me, I just wanted to kind of remind you guys, like, hey, if you have anxiety, okay, cool, not cool, but okay, that's where you're at right now. And for you to acknowledge it, like, okay, I'm feeling anxious about this. I'm feeling anxious about COVID. I'm feeling anxious about my job, not having a job, about my family, about not being able to see my family, about not being able to travel, about, there's so many different things that one could be anxious about. But there are three things that I want to talk about that will help with anxiety so much. So the first one, obviously, is to breathe. Taking a deep breath myself because I'm anxious right now. When you take a breath and when you focus on your breath, your brain goes from being in survival mode to, okay, let me think about what it feels like to breathe, right? And then that also goes with some mindfulness, right? Becoming very fully present and aware of your physical surrounding, right? So for me, if I were, on the verge of a panic attack, I would be telling myself, okay, Jude, name 5 things that you see right now. Okay, I see my laptop, my chair, I see the microphone, I see my piano, I see my wall. And then I would look for different colors in the room. Okay, there's red, there's brown, there's green, and things like that. When you focus on the physical things around you, it really helps to center your brain, and like it kind of resets your brain, right? And we're not saying that, once you do mindfulness, all of your anxiety is gonna disappear. No, that's just to bring you down from like being on the verge of a panic attack, right? But if you continue to do that and you continue to train your body to, hey, you know what? It's gonna be okay, right? A lot of things that we have anxiety about are things that we cannot control, which is unfortunately just a fact of life. And so I've learned that, and so my third tip, which I am such a fan of, is being grateful, which is hard when you're anxious and when you're depressed, right? Okay, I'm grateful that I have a place to live. I'm grateful I have a place to take a shower and to sleep. I have food in my house. I have, the ability to, have full function of all of my limbs. I have the ability to see and to hear, right? Like whenever you start to realize and start declaring what you're thankful for, you begin to change your mindset, and you begin to change the way that your brain thinks. And it's hard to be that anxious and to be that grateful. Like, you will be one or the other. And so because being grateful will give you a different perspective. Right, things are not that bad. For me, I don't think I've mentioned this yet on here, but I've also been working with kids with cancer for the last 12 years, and they are the light of my life. They give me so much joy and so much hope. And whenever I spend time with them, I leave and I'm like, okay, yeah, June, your issues are nothing. Like, yeah, you had a bad day. You hit traffic. You were late for work and your boss got mad at you. No, these kids are battling for their lives, and they know what it's like to have joy. They smile and they laugh and they play and they do all these things, and wow, okay, that really changes my mind and my perspective on what things should look like. So yeah, those are just a few of the things that I wanted to share with you guys. I know it was kind of heavy, but I feel like anxiety is something that's so rampant this year, and I really want to help you guys to learn how to sit through it, walk through it, and then walk onto the other side of it, because you don't have to live in anxiety. You don't have to live in all of that nonsense. So go ahead, comment, like, subscribe, and I will see you guys next week. Bye.